Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 21st November 2019. And the articles that we will discuss are displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion. Now this data point on page number 11 is related to the encroachments of Israel in the West Bank territory of Palestine. And this highlights that the government-backed Israeli settlements in the West Bank in Palestine have been increasing since the 1967 war. Now, Israel-Palestine conflict has been continuing after the Second World War, and this has been one of the most important conflicts in the Middle Eastern region or in the West Asian region. Now, to understand the Israel-Palestine conflict, you can go through the world history book, that is Norman Lovell. However, in this article, we will try and understand the various geographical aspects of this conflict and why are some of the locations important for us from exam point of view. So we shall look at it from the preliminary examination point of view. For example, we will look at the location of West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, etc. And many a times questions have been asked based on these locations. Now this Israeli encroachment in the Palestine region has also been in news because the US has recently announced that such encroachments by Israel will not be considered by the US as illegal. However, you should note that the United Nations and the European Union, etc., have termed these encroachments by the Israel in the Palestinian region as illegal. So this shows that the United States of America has recently changed its policy towards Israel. And that is why it has been in news in the past week or two. Now, if you look at the previous year preliminary examination question papers, you will find that questions have been asked in the preliminary examination related to various conflict zones. So, for example, this question was asked in the year 2018 in the preliminary examination. And it reads, the term two-state solution is sometimes mentioned in the news in the context of the affairs of. So, this two-state solution has been in the news in the context of the Israel and the Palestinian conflict. Secondly, you should note that this question was asked in the year 2015 and it reads, the area known as Golan Heights sometimes appears in the news in the context of. So this again is from this region and that is why it was asked in the year 2015. And that is because this region is continuously in news because of this Israel-Palestinian conflict. Further, these two similar looking questions were asked in different years by UPSC. For example, this question was asked in the year 2015 and this question was again asked in the year 2017. And the question reads that which one of the following countries of Southwest Asia does not open out into the Mediterranean Sea? So these two questions were related to the countries which have their border with the Mediterranean Sea. And this question is also taken from this conflict zone, that is the Israel-Palestinian conflict zone. And if you look at this question that was asked in the preliminary examination of 2018, it is again related to important locations which were in news, and all these locations were in the news because of various conflicts that are going on in these regions. So that is why such news articles which are related to various conflict zones are extremely important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. So in this context, let us understand the various important locations in the Israel and the Palestinian region. Now, if you look at this map, this shows the territory of Israel and the Palestine. So the territories which are under the control of Palestine are the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And this data point that is in the news article highlights that the Israel has been creating or constructing encroachments in this West Bank region. So these locations, that is the West Bank and the location of Gaza Strip, are important for us from exam point of view. And in this line, you should note that the Gaza Strip shares its border with the Mediterranean Sea. Then there is another region which is known as Golan Heights, which is continuously in news. And this Golan Height is also an Israeli occupied territory. And Israel occupied this territory in 1981. Now regarding its location, you should note that the Golan Heights has its border with countries like Lebanon, Israel, Jordan and Syria. So this can be a potential question in the exam as to which all nations share their border with the Golan Heights region continuously in news. Further, regarding the West Bank, you should note that it shares its border with Jordan. Also, the Dead Sea has its border with the West Bank. Further, Dead Sea has its border with Israel and Jordan. This can also be one of the important facts for us from preliminary examination. So all these locations are important, and as we know that previously many questions have been asked based on these. Especially there was a question related to Golan Heights in the year 2015. So similarly, all these other locations can also become important for us from preliminary examination point of view. So after this, let us look at which all countries share their border with Mediterranean Sea and on which questions have been asked previously. So regarding the countries that border the Mediterranean Sea, you should note that this question was asked in the year 2017 and it reads, the Mediterranean Sea is a border of which of the following countries? So the countries given are Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon and Syria. So as you can see in this map, the countries that share their border with Mediterranean Sea are the Lebanon, then there is Israel, then there is Syria and also Turkey. And besides these countries, many other countries are sharing their border with the Mediterranean Sea. So as you can see in this question, you could have easily eliminated that Jordan and Iraq do not share their border with Mediterranean Sea. And hence the correct answer would have been C, that is 3 and 4. That is Lebanon and Syria have their border with Mediterranean Sea. So similarly, you should note the location of different countries that share their border with the Mediterranean Sea. For example, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Spain, Italy, etc. So in this article, we have seen some of the important locations in the Middle Eastern region which are important for us from preliminary examination point of view. And with this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 10 has been written in the context of India's withdrawal from the RCEP, about which we have discussed in the Daily News Simplified of 5th November 2019 in detail. Now, because of India's withdrawal from the RCEP, it has raised various concerns that it will keep India away from enjoying the benefits of free trade agreements. So in this background, the author has analyzed the various aspects of these free trade agreements, and also he has asserted that the free trade agreements do not necessarily improve exports and investment. So simply he has highlighted that besides the free trade agreements, there are various other factors that should be taken care of to increase the exports and investments. So let us look at the way in which various aspects of the free trade agreements have been analyzed by the author. Now, when India did not join RCEP, this move of India was criticized. And various critics argued that it will stop India from enjoying the fruits of free trade agreements. And accordingly, it was asserted that India could have enjoyed the benefits of free trade agreements and it would have boosted India's exports. Secondly, it would have boosted investment flow into India. And we note that foreign direct investment plays an important role in India's growth. Thirdly, it was asserted that by becoming a member of RCEP, India would have become an important player in the global value chains. So in this background, the author has analyzed that the free trade agreements, although important for increasing exports and investment flows, however, they are not the only necessary condition for increasing the exports. And in this background, he has asserted that exports or increase in exports depends upon various factors. And mere signing of free trade agreement does not guarantee an increase in exports, and it even does not guarantee an increased investment flow. Now, the biggest benefit of joining a free trade agreement is that it reduces the import duties for the two partner countries. And generally, the import duty is reduced to zero. So in this background, the author highlights that the free trade agreements would increase the exports only when the duty imposed by the partner country was high and now it has been reduced to zero. So for example, if the duty which was imposed by the partner country was as high as 10%, and if now it has been reduced to zero, so only in such cases there are chances that the exports would increase. However, it has further been asserted that if the duties are already low and if they are then made to be near zero, then it would not make much impact on the exports. So for example, various countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, etc. have zero import duties on them. So even if India enters into a free trade agreement with these countries, there will be no impact on the exports of India. Further, there are countries like Malaysia, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, etc. And these countries have zero import duty for more than 60% of their imports. And even if India enters into a free trade agreement with these countries, there will not be much impact on the exports from India into these countries. And that is mainly because such countries already have zero import duties on 60% of their imports. Thus, the author has asserted that increase in export does not necessarily depend on entering into a free trade agreement, and it depends upon various other factors. So, the author has asserted that just by slashing down the tariffs under the free trade agreements would not necessarily lead to increase in exports. And in this background, the non-tariff barriers play an important role. Now, what are these non-tariff barriers? So here you should note that if a country imports some items from the other country, it can impose two types of barriers. First are the tariff barriers and the second are the non-tariff barriers. And these tariff barriers include some of the custom duties that are imposed on the imports. However, non-tariff barriers can include certain special requirements other than the tariff barriers. Now in these non-tariff barriers, a country can impose certain conditions on various imports. Now, for example, if there's a country A and which is importing certain products from country B. So in this case, the country A can impose certain conditions like the product which is being imported from the country B should have certain standards. And if that product does not meet those standards, the country A will reject those imports. So such kind of barriers which are created by the importing nations are known as the non-tariff barriers. And the author has suggested that these non-tariff barriers play an important role in the exports from one country. Now one such example that has been quoted by the author is that of Japan. And Japan had reduced the import duty from 10% to 0 for Indian apparels. And this was due to a free trade agreement which was signed between India and Japan in the year 2011. However, the author has asserted that India's apparel exports to Japan have decreased since 2010, and it was about $255 million in 2010, and now it has reduced to only $152 million in 2018. So this shows that despite the duties dropping from 10% to 0, there has been no major increase in the exports of Indian apparels to Japan. So this shows that the non-tariff barriers play an important role in increasing the exports. So a mere signing of free trade agreement does not guarantee an increase in the exports of a nation. Now the second question that has been raised by the author is that does a lower duty regime due to the joining of a free trade agreement lead to increased investment in a country? So in this case, he has asserted that the investments in a country not necessarily depends upon lower duty structure. However, it depends upon various other factors. For example, investments in a country depend upon the tax cuts which are provided by the nation, if the land available is cheap or not, if the power easily available. So all these factors play an important role in making a country an important investment destination. And it does not only depend upon lowering of the duty under the free trade agreements. Further, it has been argued that if the economy is not functioning efficiently, and in that case, if the duties are lowered, there can be reverse flow of investments. That is, the companies or firms can move out of that country rather than investing in that country. For example, if there's a country A and it does not have an efficient economy, so in this case, rather than increase in investment into this country, there can be reverse flow of investment from this country. That is, various firms and companies will now move to better efficient economies. That is because it reduces the cost of manufacturing or producing a product. So in that case, the author has suggested that if a country is not the most efficient economy, some level of import wall or tax barriers or tariff barriers helps the country in getting external investments. And to support this argument, the author has provided the example of Australia and India's automobile industry. Now, in case of Australia, in the year 1987, it used 89% of the cars in its country, and those cars were produced in the Australia itself. And it did not depend upon import of automobile vehicles. And at that time, in the year 1987, the tariff duty or the import duty in Australia on automobiles was around 45%. However, gradually, over a period of time, Australia decreased this tariff duty from 45% to 5%. Now, the present situation is that Australia imports nearly almost all the automobiles into its country, and they are not produced locally. So, this shows that rather than increasing the investment in Australia, the automobile countries moved out of Australia. However, in case of India, it has attracted significant investments in the automobile sector. And that was mainly because of high import duties that were imposed on the imports of automobiles into India. Now, by imposing high import duties on imports, it helped India in creating and developing its own indigenous car and auto component industry. And this has increased the efficiency of producing automobiles in India. So, this highlights that if the firms that are functioning in a country are not efficient enough, then in that case, an import wall becomes necessary. And that is because it provides an opportunity for the country to develop its component markets and increase its efficiency. And once this efficiency is gained, it can then remove these import duties. And as we have seen in case of India, gradually duties on the imports of automobiles are being reduced. So this shows that the investment flow into a country mainly depends upon the efficiency and various factors like easy availability of land, ease of doing business, etc. And it does not necessarily depend upon the lowering of import duties. And as such, by only joining a free trade agreement, it will not lead to increase in investment. However, these factors need to be taken care of. That is, there should be ease of doing business, and also the firms that are already functioning into a country should be efficient enough to stand in front of the competition that will be posed by the companies that are investing in the country. Now, the third point on which India not joining the RCEP was criticized was that India will miss out on the opportunity of being a part of the global value chains. Now, what are these global value chains? Now, in the present world economy, a product is not necessarily produced within the borders of one country only. Now, regarding global value chains, you should note that it involves all the processes that are involved in the production, supply and distribution as well as post sales of a product. And presently what is happening that all these activities are distributed across the world. And that is what has been termed as the global value chains. So for example, various components of a product are being produced in different countries. Then that product is being assembled in another country. And from there, it is being sold in a different country. So all these represents the interlinking of different geographies for the production, supply, distribution and post sales of a product. So this is what is known as global value chain. So one of the criticism of India not joining the RCEP is that it is missing out on the opportunity of being an integral part of the global value chain. However, in this background, the author has suggested that integration with the global value chains requires efficient port systems. It should have efficient customs officials. Then there should be efficient shipping, roads and regulatory compliance infrastructure. And also, the global value chain production also requires harmonization of product and quality standards. So in this case, he asserts that India has free trade agreements with ASEAN, Japan and Korea. And these three, that is the ASEAN grouping, the Japan and Korea, are important players in the Asian value chain. However, despite having a free trade agreement with ASEAN, Japan and India, India is not an integral part of the Asian value chain and has weak presence in the various sectors like electronics, machinery production and apparel's value chain. So this shows that merely being a part of a free trade agreement will not help India become an integral member or the integral player in the global value chains. And it will have to work on an efficient port system, shipping system, and will also have to develop product quality and standards, etc. And that is how it can become an important player in the global value chains. So now, after analyzing that, the free trade agreements will not necessarily lead to exports unless the non-tariff barriers are also removed. Further, the investments will depend upon the efficiency of the firms that are operating in the country. And thirdly, to become the member of global value chain or to become an important player in the global value chain, the country needs to focus on efficiencies on various aspects. So now what should be India's focus and what can India do in this background? So the author has suggested that India should focus on improving the firm level competitiveness. Further, the government can lower the duties on raw materials and intermediaries rather than focusing on the finished product imports. So by lowering the duties on raw materials and intermediate products, India can increase its effectiveness and efficiency, etc. And then India's economy can become competitive with that of other global economies. And thirdly, India needs to focus on elaborate quality and standards of infrastructure for essential products. So these are the three suggestions which have been provided by the author. So in this article, we have understood that besides having free trade agreements, the focus of a country to increase the exports should be on reduction of non-tariff barriers. Secondly, to increase the investments, there should be increased efficiency and also various other factors should be taken care of. For example, there should be reduction in taxes, land should be available easily, and all other factors of ease of doing business should be available. And only when the local industry becomes competitive and efficient, the import wall or the duties should be lowered. And finally, to become a member of global value chain, there should be an increase in the quality standards and also there should be efficiency in different factors. So after this discussion, you should try and answer this question from your mains examination point of view. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 11 highlights the issue of faulty calculation of GDP rates in India. And in this article, the author has suggested that India may be overestimating its GDP growth rates. And the argument that has been forwarded by the author in this article is that there is lack of correlation between the GDP growth data and the consumption expenditure and the job creation data. And in this, he has supported this argument by highlighting the results of PLFS or the Periodic Labor Force Survey Report and also Household Consumption Expenditure Survey Report. And both of these have highlighted the increasing problem of unemployment in India and also reduced consumption expenditure in India. Thus, the author says that there is lack of correlation between the GDP data and the data which has been provided by the PLFS survey or the Periodic Labor Force Survey and the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. Now, the increasing unemployment and the decreasing consumption expenditure highlights that India might be overestimating its gross domestic product or GDP growth rates. So in short, this article has raised questions regarding the GDP calculation in India. Now, this issue of faulty GDP calculation was discussed in detail in the Daily News Simplified of 13th November 2019, that is very recently. So you can go through this article in this DNS and try and understand the various issues with the GDP estimates in India. And in this discussion in the DNS of 13th November 2019, various issues like the flawed database issue, further flawed methodology, and also problems with the estimation of state domestic products were highlighted. So you should go through this video to understand the issues with the GDP data in India. However, in this article, let us try and understand the PLFS survey report which has been highlighted by the author and also the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey report which has also been used by the author to support the argument that the GDP might be overestimated in India. Now, most of the economists like the former Chief Economic Advisor of India, Arvind Subramanian, has suggested that annual GDP growth rates during the last few years may have been overestimated by 0.36 to 2.5 percentage points. And in this regard, the author highlights that the Periodic Labor Force Survey Report as well as the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey Report both highlight that the GDP growth rate in India might have been overestimated. Now, what were the highlights of this Periodic Labor Force Survey Report? The first thing that it highlighted was that the unemployment in India has increased to a 45-year high of 6.1%. Secondly, the employment level declined between 2011 and 12 and 2017 and 18. And the estimate fall in the employment was in the range of 6 million to 15 million. Now, besides a fall in the unemployment, a decline or a stagnation in the wage rates has been witnessed. And these wage rates have stagnated in both rural areas as well as urban areas. So this highlights the gravity of problem of unemployment in India. However, India's official GDP estimates have failed to capture such a decline in the economic activity. Thus, there is no correlation between the unemployment data and the GDP growth rate data. Further, as far as the economic activity in India is concerned, there were two shocks of demonetization and GST. And demonetization had clearly affected the unorganized sector. However, GST has had its impact on the organized sector. Thus, there was a general decline in the economic activity during the demonetization year, that was 2016 and 2017. However, the official GDP estimates in the year 2016 and 17 were about 8.2%. So this shows that although the economic activity was falling, the unemployment rate was also increasing and the wage rates have stagnated in the rural India. Despite that, the GDP growth rate was shown to be increasing. So this shows that there is no correlation between the two datas. And thus this highlights that the GDP data might have been overestimated. Further, the government has recently decided not to release the National Statistical Office's survey, which is known as the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey Report. Now, this survey was carried out to capture the trends in the household consumption expenditure. And according to the leaked report, the average monthly consumption expenditure has fallen for the first time since 1972 to 73. And this average monthly consumption expenditure has been reduced from rupees 1501 in 2011 and 12 to rupees 1446 in the year 2017 and 18. And in this background, the government has scrapped this consumption expenditure survey report, stating that it was in variance with the official GDP estimates. However, this points towards one thing, that the GDP estimates might be overestimated. This is because all the other reports are highlighting a decline in the economic activity. For instance, the household consumption expenditure or the demand is declining. Secondly, the unemployment rate is increasing. And thirdly, the wage rates have stagnated. So all these point towards an overestimation in the GDP growth rates of India. So these are a few points which have been highlighted by the author in support of the argument that there is no correlation between the GDP estimates and the data related to employment, wage rate and consumption expenditure. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, in this article on page number 12, the cabinet has recently given nod for Industrial Relations Code Bill. Now, you should note that India has multiple laws for labor's industrial employment and disputes. However, these are seen as one of the biggest issues against the ease of doing business. So, in order to simplify the multiple laws, that is the 44 central laws, the government has now created 3 laws, or is aiming to create 3 laws for covering trade unions, industrial employment and the disputes. Now, some of the previous laws included resolution of industrial disputes, working conditions in factories, wage and bonus payments, etc. And the cabinet has given its approval for the simplification of such laws based on the recommendations of Second National Commission on Labour. And the government's aim is to simplify, rationalize and amalgamate various labour laws into 4 labour codes. And these are Code on Wages, Industrial Relations, Social Security and Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions. Now, although various aspects of this Industrial Relation Code Bill have not been made public, however, it has received cabinet nod. So, in this regard, let us look at the available information related to this Industrial Relations Code Bill. So, this will fall under General Studies Paper 3 under the topic Economic Development. And in the preliminary examination of 2019, a question was asked related to one of the aspects that will be included in this Industrial Relations Code Bill. So this Industrial Relations Code Bill of 2019 provides that it will amalgamate many central laws related to the labor. So for example, it aims at simplifying and rationalizing the relevant provisions of three central labor acts. The first is the Trade Unions Act of 1926, the Industrial Employment Act of 1946, and also the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947. The second is related to the retrenchment of the workers. Now, retrenchment simply means that the worker can be refused the work after some point of time. So, in this regard, presently the Industrial Disputes Act requires various firms employing more than 100 workers to seek permission from their respective state governments to remove or retrench or lay off the workers. However, in order to impart flexibility to the firms, the threshold, that is the 100 worker limit for prior approval of the state government, has been kept unchanged at the 100 employees only. However, this code, that is the Industrial Relations Code Bill of 2019, has added one provision, and it is that it can change such number of employees, that is the requirement of 100 worker organization can be changed through a notification of the central government. So it has kept one provision to change this provision of organizations that are employing more than 100 workers. So it can be altered at a later date also with a notification of the central government. Further, this bill provides for speedier resolution of industrial disputes. And in this, the code seeks to set up a two-member tribunal. And presently, the tribunal is composed of only one member. And in case of important industrial disputes or important cases related to industrial disputes, both the members will jointly adjudicate the case. However, for other industrial disputes, only a single member will be used or will adjudicate the case, and that will make the process of adjudication speedier and simple. Now, the fourth important aspect is that of fixed term employment. Now, fixed term employment means that this employment is provided for a limited time period. And this fixed term employment workman was provided in the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act of 1946. And this fixed term employment workman is a workman who has been engaged on the basis of a written contract of employment, and that too for a fixed period of time. So these are the two aspects of this fixed term employment. Now, what are the key highlights of the standing order of Ministry of Labour and Employment related to this fixed term employment workman? So the standing orders provided that the fixed term employment workman's service conditions will not be less than that of permanent workmen. This means that all conditions like the hours of work, the wages, allowances and benefits will not be lesser as compared to the permanent workmen. And a person in the fixed term employment will be eligible for all statutory benefits available to a permanent workman. And these will be available proportionately according to the period of the service which is rendered by the fixed term employee. Secondly, no notice of termination of employment is required at the expiry of the fixed term. So this means that the fixed period which has been provided in the written contract will lead to the termination of the employee. And for that, no additional notice will have to be given by the employer to the employee. Now, the main objective of providing the fixed term employment is to provide flexibility to the industries in hiring the human resources according to their new demands that arise. However, by providing for fixed service conditions, the service order aims at protecting the workers from the exploitation by the firms. So it takes care of the interests of both the employers as well as the employees. Now finally, this Industrial Relations Code Bill 2019 provides that the fixed term employment workmen would not be paid compensation on their retrenchment. So there is no requirement for giving out a notice for termination in case of fixed term employment, and also the fixed term employment workmen would not be paid any compensation on their retrenchment. And this provides the flexibility to the firms which are employing these employees. And this has been provided with the objective of providing flexibility to the firms. And they can hire resources according to the needs and demands of these firms. However, the details of this Industrial Relations Code Bill 2019 will only be known once the bill is introduced into the Parliament. So let us wait for the full bill to be made public. And with this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 9 reads that the olive Ridley turtles have arrived in Odisha for the mating season. Now, olive Ridley turtles are extremely important for us from the preliminary examination point of view in the section Environment and Ecology. And these olive Ridley turtles reach the coast of Odisha in the winters for their mass nesting. And one of the important coasts where these olive Ridley turtles mate is the Rushikulya beach in Odisha. So in this background, let us look at some of the key aspects that are important for us from preliminary examination point of view relative to these olive Ridley turtles. Now regarding the olive Ridley turtle, you should note that these are migratory turtle species, and they come to India for nesting during the winter season. Now they are famous for their synchronized nesting in mass numbers, and this type of nesting is known as aribadas. Further, the habitat of these olive Ridley turtles become important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. So these olive Ridley turtles are primarily found in the warm and tropical waters of all the important oceans, that is the Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. Further, the nesting sites of olive Ridley turtle that are found in India are important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. So here you should note that the Hope Island of Kuringa Wildlife Sanctuary, which is located in the Andhra Pradesh, is one of the important sites for nesting of olive Ridley turtles. And also, as we have seen in this article, the Thottapalli estuary in Kerala is also another important site for the nesting of olive Ridley turtle. They are also found in Gahirmatha beach in the Odisha, Astaranga coast in Odisha, beach of Rushikulya river which is also in Odisha, and in the Devi river mouth in Odisha. So primarily they are found in 3 states, that is Andhra Pradesh, Odisha and Kerala. Further, the protection status of this animal becomes important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. So under the IUCN's red list, it is listed as a vulnerable species. In India's Wildlife Protection Act 1972, they are listed in the Schedule 1, and which means that it has the highest protection and highest penalties are awarded for the killing of this olive Ridley turtle. Further, in the sites, they are listed in the Appendix 1, and you should note that those species which are listed in Appendix 1 are the most endangered among the sites listed animals. Now, all these facts that we have discussed are important for us from the preliminary examination point of view and can be asked in the exam. Now, after today's discussion, let us take up these questions from our preliminary examination point of view, and the answer for these questions will be displayed after 5 seconds. The first question reads, which of the following countries share their border with the Dead Sea? And as we have learned, the Dead Sea shares its borders with Israel and Jordan, and the correct answer is B, that is 1 and 3 only. Second question is that the Golan Heights shares its borders with which of the following? And as we have learned, it has its borders with 4 countries, including Israel, Syria, Lebanon and Jordan. Hence the correct answer is D, 1, 2 and 3. Third question reads, consider the following statements about olive Ridley turtles. First is that the mass nesting of these turtles is known as aribada, which is correct. Second is that the Kuringa Wildlife Sanctuary is an important nesting site for these turtles, which is also correct. Hence the correct answer is C, that is both 1 and 2. With this we conclude our discussion. Now let's take up the question for today.